If you want a franchise with more entries than basically any other on the Game Boy Advance, don't look at Super Mario, Mega Man, or even Pokémon. Topping them all is the manga spin-off Goliath Yu-Gi-Oh!, whose literal archive of games up to this point largely revolve around this card game called Duel Monsters. One of the highest grossing media franchises of all time, not quite at the aforementioned Mario or Pokémon levels, but still pretty monolithic in its own right. The folks at Konami darn sure milked the Yu-Gi-Oh! Property for everything it was worth on the GBA, with a staggering, and arguably too many, 11 mainline games, 2 multi-packs, and even a GBA video card featuring 2 episodes from the anime. I must admit about Yu-Gi-Oh! That it was a phenomenon that passed me by entirely, to the point where I even pronounced it with a hard G until I was corrected. I'm still not sure which is the right way to say it. The first time I ever came across the franchise was when writing my first book, the DMG Game Boy Encyclopaedia, out soon by Bitmap Books, where one of the last titles to be released on that system was 1998's card-based tactics game Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters. It took a while for me to get into, but turned out to be a pretty fun card battler with some creative design throughout. There were even 4 Game Boy Color titles of varying styles, one of which was released across 3 compatible different cartridges. Unfortunately, nothing I can remember from those earlier Game Boy games really helps much in this one, because, as suggested by the title, this isn't card-based, but dice-based. You're a dungeon master who must face off against another across this grid expanse. The objective of the game is to reduce your opponent's dungeon master life points to 0 by attacking it with your summoned monsters. Each DM starts with 3 life points, and you take turns to roll 3 dice, summoning monsters and creating paths across the board. There's a deck building element to the game in that you must curate your pool of 15 dice, which typically have monsters on. Before getting too much into the game, it's worth explaining more about these dice, as there's a lot to get into with that. Each 6-sided die is labelled after a particular monster, apart from a few rarer item dice, which are all at a particular level and are of a different colour, which I'll explain in a bit. Each die has different symbols on, called crests, and these are pivotal to your progress. When you roll your 3 dice at the start of a turn, they'll land on one of these crests, of which there are 6 different ones. 5 of these simply add to your possible moves. Movement crests will grant you a particular number of spaces you're allowed to move a monster on the battlefield. Attack crests represent that number of turns of attack, and defense crests give you a block to spare a character from an incoming attack. Magic crests let you use a spell, and trap crests let you rig a trap somewhere. When you roll your 3 dice, any of these crests that you get will be added to your coffers on the left-hand side, or they might even be multipliers and so on. You can only move characters, attack, block and so on if you have credit in these coffers, which might strike you as an odd way of doing things, but it's kind of pivotal for the gameplay. For instance, if you have a number 3 in your movement box, that means you can move your in-play monsters a total of 3 spaces between them, and then you'll have to earn more. You can only perform an attack if you have an attack crest handy, likewise with blocking, magic and so on. Pretty stingy it may be, but without this, the game would have basically no random elements, and would be over in a flash. Not my favourite battling mechanic in one of these deck builders, but there it is. Each monster has its own stats, such as HP, attack power, and so on, but also they have their own die faces, meaning that some might have higher values that they contribute to various crests. As I mentioned, monsters can be one of 5 levels. The higher the level, the stronger the monster, obviously, but it also becomes harder to summon. The summon crests are the more unique ones out of the 6 that you can roll. When you choose your 3 dice before each turn, try if you can to match their colour. You can only summon a monster if you roll 2 matching crests for a level 1 or 2, and 3 matching crests for anything higher than that. As you might expect, these high-level beasts are pretty hard to summon. You really need to curate your pool of dice to favour your chances of summoning a monster. As for what the individual colours mean, essentially they're more weighted to different types of crests you're more likely to find. White will often have more summon crests, for example, or red will have more attack ones. At the start of a battle, the 2 dungeon masters are separated by a wide, empty expanse of space that you can't move on. You need to create a continuous bridge between the 2 of you, and will more than likely connect somewhere in the middle. And the way you do this is as a byproduct of summoning monsters, which makes it a really important thing to try and do, especially early on. The monsters are housed in their dice, and when you bring them to the battlefield, their cube will expand into one of the possible nets that you can cycle through. I mean, there's tons more in terms of strategy strategy in this game, and it opens up a lot more as your pool of dice gets bigger. You'll earn new ones every time you win a battle. The game is an interesting variant on the deck building concept, however the rules could definitely use some work and a bit more balance. It does take a good while to build up enough resources to really get going. Before that, you're really just switching turns over and over again, and then, to be honest, it's not massively good fun when it does get going. Many opponents are overly defensive, which makes matches drag on even longer than normal. Sometimes games can just grind to a halt because you're struggling to summon monsters yourself and so can't progress up the board, and the opponent is just placing their new bridges around themselves rather than advancing. I usually enjoy these sorts of games to a degree, but I do have a couple of prerequisites. You need to get some sense of progression regularly, even if it's only in small increments, and that's not always the case in this one. Also, there should be lots to learn as you go on, but the knowledge requirements to get into the game shouldn't be so large that you need to consult FAQs or a tutorial just to understand what's going on. The battle parts are flat out boring anyway, with no interactivity at all and a very basic animation. There are 10 more chances for Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Yu-Gi-Oh! And Konami to give us a good game, and while it might appeal to some die-hard fans of the genre or the franchise, I don't think Dungeon Dice Monsters is it, guys.